Welcome to this week's podcast. What I'd like to do first is actually do a notebook check. So if you'd please go get your notebook and then have a pen or a pencil around, I'm going to walk you through how to score a notebook entry. So go ahead and do that. Pause if you need to. Now that you have your notebook, I'd like you to open to one entry. We've actually been in class for, I think, 3 weeks, so you should have 3 different weeks of entries of a notebook. So choose one of those weeks. What I'd like you to do is to give yourself a point if you have a title on that notebook page. So just give yourself a point, just put it on someplace. Then you have the date listed as well. Just give yourself a point for that. You should have drawn a diagram, and it may be more than one diagram, and that's fine, but give yourself a point if you've done that. You should also have labels on your diagram. And then you should have taken notes. So on the podcast, you should be taking notes. Maybe in class, you're taking notes. So hopefully someplace you have some notes on that entry. You should also be asking yourself questions, and you should be answering those questions as well. So I come up with about 7 total right here for that if we give ourselves 1 point for each of those items. So if you would score yourself on the notebook, and then I'll gather the scores from you when we get to class on Thursday. Last week in class, I asked you to begin to think about creating a model or a representation with the minerals and the igneous rocks that we're dealing with. Let me dial back just a little bit and talk to you about models. So when we talk about models, there's actually several kinds of models. One of those is what we call a mental model. So what I'd like you to do is take a look at this diagram right here and see if you can find a face in the diagram. I'm going to give you, hit pause, go ahead and do that. And if you can find a face, then I'll ask you, how many faces do you see in that diagram? Now that you've had a chance to think about that, what you're doing here is you're creating a mental model. You're looking at the image, you're trying to figure out what's going on, and you're putting that together. Did you find 3 different faces? There's actually 3 of them. So this is a hat. Follow the forehead right here. Here's a guy's nose, and here's his mustache way down here, and here's that guy's eye. So that's one. It's an old man with a hat on. Another one is a young lady who's also wearing a hat, but this is her hairline right here coming down. This is her forehead. There's her eye right here. Here's her nose. Here's her chin down along that way. Okay, and this is the back of her hair right here. Okay, and this would be like a scarf or something on her back. Then there's also another lady in, and in that case, it's this person right here. Her face comes down this way, and this becomes her nose right here. It comes down, here's her mouth right through there. Here's her chin down here. Okay, so you can see that we end up with kind of an older woman looking down there. So there's actually 3 different images that you can see there. And again, we create mental models to help us find those things. And if you didn't find all of those images in there, there may be something, off a little bit with your mental model, just isn't developed as well as somebody else's. Well, the thing about mental models is that they lead to inconclusions at times because they are personal, they only belong to you, they're often inadequate, we don't have a full understanding of the mental model that we're creating. They're also subject to error. So even though we use mental models a lot, we have to be aware of their limitations. So instead, we can begin to use other kinds of models to help us understand things. So in the world of science, we use models that depict things, like in the upper right-hand corner right here, this might be a model of some molecule where each of these little spheres represents an atom. The little lines are the materials between the pieces represent the bonds between the atoms. Down here in the lower left, some of you may know that this is a model of a DNA molecule. We can't actually see a DNA molecule, they're too small to be seen, but we can model what we think it looks like based on the observations that we make of DNA. We can also use computers to help us with modeling, and in this particular case, this is a weather model. So we can look at past weather patterns. We can see what's happening with temperatures, with air pressures, things like that. And so we can take that data, put it in a computer, and use the computer to help us create a model of what the weather may be like. That's actually how they predict hurricanes, tornadoes, big snowstorms, things like that. They're using computer models to do that. Well, you were faced with the challenge of creating a model last week in class. And what I asked you to do was to take a phenomenon, which is actually where most model creation begins. So you start with something that's puzzling or some piece of phenomenon. In this case, you set a set of minerals down here, and then you knew that that set of minerals created a set of igneous rocks. So your challenge was then to take that phenomenon of minerals to rocks and find a way to represent that phenomenon through a model, through some representation. Well, one of the groups actually
lined up these rocks
did this. Look at this.
From the brightest to the darkest. These are the minerals, starting with quartz, ending with olivine. And we took igneous rocks and lined them up beside these minerals from the color brightness to dark. This one goes here because it's in that range. And then we're using that to help us figure out which of these minerals are in these igneous rocks.
Nice. Good job. Thank you.
So that was one group's attempt at trying to take a particular variable, in this case it was the color of the minerals, and then taking the phenomenon of minerals to rocks and saying, well, maybe we can use the fact that minerals have colors, the fact that igneous rock have colors, and we can begin to figure out our model based on that variable. And I would challenge you as you think about this over the next week or so, well, coming to class on Thursday, that there's more than one variable that could be used. So color is a variable. Remember, I mentioned a couple others in class on Thursday last week, and one of those was texture. Another one of those might be how heavy it is or something like that. So think of those various variables as you're thinking about creating your model. So what I'd like you to do between now and Thursday is to jot down some notes in your notebook. And now that you know a little bit more about modeling, see if you can come up with some other ideas that you can put to work on Thursday in your group to help you create that model of the phenomenon of minerals going to igneous rocks. See you Thursday.